Hi class, this is Mr. Trez, and this lesson is going to be on how to graph linear equations that have a negative slope. Our learning objective: the student will be able to graph linear equations written in slope-intercept form by using their understanding of slope and y-intercept. Our essential question: explain how to use the slope and y-intercept to graph linear equations that are written in slope-intercept form. So before we go on to graphing linear equations, it's good to think back and reflect on how do we get a negative value. So when we did our rules for rational numbers, what was a negative divided by a positive equal to? So if I had a negative rational number divided by a positive rational number, a negative divided by a positive would be equal to a negative value. And also, if we had a positive divided by a negative, so if we had a positive number divided by a negative number, what type of value would that give us? Well, that again would give us a negative value. And this is going to help us with graphing because we want to have a negative value. Our slope is going to have a negative value. So we're always going to have one negative move and one positive move on our graph. Or we can have one positive move and one negative move. Either way, it's going to give us a negative value, which in our case is going to give us a negative slope, which is going to make our graph go downhill. It's going to go from left to right downward. So let's take a look at our first example. We want to use our understanding of slope and y-intercept to draw a line that represents the equation. And our equation, written in slope-intercept form, is y equals negative 1/3 x plus 2. So the first thing we want to do is identify what is our slope and what is our y-intercept. So looking carefully at our equation, we could see our slope is negative 1/3, and we could see our y-intercept is positive 2. How do we know our slope is negative 1/3? Because that is our coefficient. That is our number that is going to be multiplied by our variable. And the y-intercept is just a constant. It's the number that we add or subtract. So let's start graphing. The first point that I want to graph is our y-intercept. And our y-intercept is positive 2. So I'm going to put a point on positive 2. Now I want to graph the slope. And our slope is negative 1/3. So now I have a decision to make. Let's recall from the previous slide, I have to have a negative move followed by a positive move, or a positive move followed by a negative move. So one way that I could draw the graph is I could go negative 1/3. So I could go down 1, and there's my negative move since I went down, and then I could go 3 to the right. 1, 2, 3, and draw my point. And when I move to the right, that represents a positive move. So I have my 2 points, and I could see that it is going downhill. Now, I could have also have done this. I could have gone a positive move first, and then a negative move. So I could have gone up 1, and then to the left, 1, 2, 3, and draw my point. Either way, it's going to give me the correct answer. I can either go down and to the right, or up and to the left. One negative move, one positive move, or a positive move followed by a negative move. The last thing I want to do is graph my line. And there we go. So as we can see, we're going to start with our y-intercept first, which is positive 2. That's going to be the first point that we're going to graph. And let's remember, our y-intercept is the point that lies on the y-axis, the vertical axis. We're then going to use the slope of -1/3 to find the other point or points. So from the y-intercept, since it's -1/3, remember, I have to have one negative move and one positive move. So I could go down 1, there's my negative, and then to the right, 1, 2, 3, draw my point, and there's -1/3. Or I could go up as my positive, and then to the left, 1, 2, 3, draw my point, and there is -1/3. Finally, I want to draw a big line connecting the points, and this line represents y equals -1/3 x plus 2. Let's take a look at another equation. So, using your understanding of slope and y-intercept, let's draw a line that represents the equation y equals -2x minus 1. So the first thing I want to do is identify my slope and my y-intercept. So in this case, my slope is -2. Now, I like to write it as a fraction. So instead of just -2, I'm going to write it as -2 over 1. And anytime I have a whole number, it always has a denominator of 1 because it keeps the value. -2 divided by 1 is -2. So I like to write it as a fraction. This way I can see I have a rise over a run, or since it's negative, a fall over a run. And now I want to take a look at my y-intercept. In this case, my y-intercept is going to be -1. And just be careful, because you always want to look at the sign in front of the number. If it says -1, that represents plus -1. So this has a negative value. So you want to look at what's in front of the number. So my y-intercept is going to be -1. So now I have my slope, I have my y-intercept. Now I want to graph. The first point that I'm going to graph is going to be the y-intercept, which is -1. So on the y-axis, the vertical axis, I'm going to point on -1. Now I'm going to use my slope to help me find the other point. My slope is -2 over 1. So remember, one negative move, one positive move. One way that I could do it is I could go down 2 spaces, and then I could run 1 to the right. Down represents the negative move. To the right represents the positive move. So I'm going to go down 2. I'm going to run 1, and I'm going to draw my point. Another way that I could do it and think of it is instead of going down and to the right, I could go up, which represents my positive move, and to the left, which represents my negative move. So I'm going to go up 2, run 1 to the left, and there's my point. So either way, it's going to give me the correct solution. I could go down and to the right, draw my point, or I could go up and to the left and draw my point. Finally, I want to draw a big line connecting the points. And this line represents the equation y equals -2x minus 1. Let's take a look at one more example. So here I have an equation, y equals -3x. So the first thing I want to do is find my slope and also my y-intercept. So in this case, my slope is -3, and I like to write it as a fraction because I like to see a rise and a run. So -3 over 1. And let's just remember, anytime we have a whole number, such as -3, we can always write it as a fraction as -3 over 1. Every time we have a whole number, the denominator is going to be 1. And now let's take a look at our y-intercept. Well, I don't see a y-intercept in the equation, but it's there. Okay, so if it's y equals -3x, It's really an equivalent equation would be y equals negative 3x plus 0. So we know that the y-intercept in this case is 0. So I have my slope, I have my y-intercept. Now I'm going to graph. First point that I want to graph is the y-intercept, which in this case is 0. So I'm going to put a point, or I'm going to graph a point that is on the origin. Now I'm going to use my slope of negative 3, or negative 3 over 1, to find my other point or points. So instead of rising and running, I'm going to fall. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and run 1. 1, 2, 3, and run 1, and then draw my point. Again, I was going down as my negative move, and then to the right is my positive. Negative move, positive move. Now, I can also go the other way. I'm going to rise 3 and run 1 to the left. Going to rise 3 and run 1 to the left. And even before I draw my line, it's good just to double check. And I could see that my line is really going downhill from left to right. So if I made a mistake, it might be going uphill the line if I made a mistake. But since our slope is negative, the line also has to be going downhill, negative. So now, let's draw our line, connecting the points. And there is our line. And this line represents the equation y equals negative 3x, or we could think of the equation as y equals negative 3x plus 0, with a slope of negative 3 over 1, going down 3, right 1, or up 3, left 1, and it has a y-intercept of 0. So it started at the origin. Thank you for watching this video.